Under arrest on suspicion of conspiracy to supply Class A heroin and cocaine from December 2021 until today's date. Okay, you don't have to say anything, but it may have attention. We're not putting into one question so far in court. Anything to do with him, we've given evidence.
It was just before dawn in South Wales, the kind of grey morning when the streets lie silent and the mist hangs low over the M4 corridor. But on this day, silence was broken by boots and radios. Dozens of officers in plain clothes moved through the woods near Newport. Their target, a quiet man with no flash cars, no mansion, and no record. Yet behind that modest life was a major criminal network moving cocaine and heroin across Britain. When the door came off its hinges, Robert Andrews Jr. was inside. Calm. Collected. Surrounded by encrypted phones, cash bundles, and notes linking him to a £5 million trafficking network. He didn't fit the image of a kingpin. No designer labels. No gold watches. Just a man who knew how to hide in plain sight. Police called him a key coordinator, the invisible hand behind drop-offs in woodland car parks and roadside exchanges near the M4. For years, he built his empire in silence, feeding addiction across South Wales and beyond. But on that December morning, his luck finally ran out. As officers led him away, neighbors watched from behind curtains, stunned. No one had suspected that the man next door was running one of the UK's largest Class A supply operations. If stories like this disappear from your feed, you'll never see how close organized crime really gets. Don't look away, subscribe now before the truth disappears behind closed doors. Newport. Once a proud industrial town in South Wales, built on docks, steel, and sweat. But when the factories closed and the jobs faded, something else took root. Streets that once echoed with the sound of work turned quiet, and in that quiet, crime began to whisper. Robert Andrews Jr. grew up here. Not in luxury, not in chaos, just the kind of place where people worked hard and expected little back. His name was never in trouble reports, never in local gossip. He was one of thousands trying to find a way through the struggle of a changing Wales. By the late 2000s, Newport had changed. The economy had shifted. For some, stability came through family and trade. For others, through risk. As the legitimate jobs vanished, the underground economy filled the void, small exchanges, quiet deals, and people learning that quick cash was only ever one call away. There's little public record of Andrews Jr.'s early life. But those who knew the world around him, they knew the pattern. Young men drawn into networks that promised escape. Some carried parcels, others drove cars. And those who learned to keep silent climbed higher. Andrews Jr. was one of the silent ones. Patient. Careful. He didn't crave attention, he craved control. At first, there was nothing remarkable about Robert Andrews Jr. No sudden wealth. No trail of cash. No signal that he was running anything more than an ordinary life in South Wales. To neighbors, he was polite, quiet, even forgettable. But inside the digital world, a second life had already begun. When detectives in South Wales began tracing a network linked to heroin and cocaine supply, Andrews Jr.'s name didn't even appear. It came up by chance, buried deep in WhatsApp messages seized from another suspect, a gang leader named Kerry Evans operating out of Merthyr Tydfil. The chats were coded and cautious. References to jobs, bags, and numbers. But one contact kept reappearing, a phone linked to Newport, registered to no obvious business, and used only in the evenings. It was Andrews Jr. Police followed that thread quietly. Each time Evans organized a drop, Andrews's number flashed in the background. At first, they thought he might be a driver or a middle link, someone moving parcels between towns. But as the weeks turned to months, that role began to look bigger, more deliberate. Public records later confirmed that Andrews Jr. wasn't on the radar before this moment. He had no significant criminal history, no flagged vehicles, and no known associates under watch. That made him perfect. Invisible. Investigators would later say that the most dangerous dealers aren't the ones showing off, they're the ones who blend in. Andrews did just that. No sports car, no nightlife, no social media presence. Just a man who appeared to work, go home, and mind his business. Behind closed doors, messages moved faster than money. Encrypted apps, trusted couriers, and late-night exchanges across county lines. Every deal added another layer between Andrews and the street trade, and every layer made him harder to catch. By the time police realized who they were dealing with, he wasn't just a courier anymore. He was coordinating movements, the timing, the routes, and the handlers. The kind of structure that doesn't happen by accident. No one around him would have guessed it. But within a few short years, Robert Andrews Jr. had quietly become the unseen link between the South Wales supply chain and the wider UK network. By the time investigators placed Robert Andrews Jr. under formal surveillance, he was no longer a background name on encrypted chats, he was running the show. Detectives later described his operation as industrial scale, the kind usually controlled by major organized crime groups, not a quiet man from Newport. Records presented in court showed transactions worth over £100,000 taking place in supermarket car parks, back roads, and isolated woodland. These weren't small exchanges. They were controlled movements of cocaine and heroin destined for street networks across South Wales. Andrews Jr. coordinated the trade with a calm precision that baffled police. He didn't flaunt wealth, he didn't travel abroad, and he didn't post a trace of himself online. Instead, he used multiple phones, encrypted messaging apps, and trusted intermediaries to disguise his role. Investigators tracked drop sites hidden near the M4 corridor, quiet woodland clearings and laybys where couriers would meet under cover of night. Bags changed hands, engines never turned off, and by the time police arrived, the cars were long gone. To maintain control, Andrews kept his circle small. He relied on runners who didn't know the full picture, suppliers who never saw his face, and coded references for every shipment. Even his associates struggled to tell where the money went, only that it kept moving. Police sources would later confirm that the network stretched beyond South Wales, connecting Merthyr Tydfil, Cardiff, and Newport to larger supply routes feeding the West Midlands and the south of England. It was a map built on trust, fear, and silence. But the silence couldn't last forever. Within the same messages that built his empire, detectives began to find its weakness, the one thing every criminal network fears most: exposure. And not everyone in his circle was as loyal as he believed. One phone call was all it would take to tear the operation apart. But that call was already being made. At its height, Robert Andrews Jr.'s operation was a model of quiet control, large enough to flood counties, careful enough to avoid headlines. Detectives later described it as a franchise in motion, with Andrews coordinating multiple drivers, stash houses, and cash couriers who rarely knew one another by name. Surveillance logs from South Wales police showed the scale. Multi-kilo shipments of heroin and cocaine moved weekly, high purity, tightly wrapped, and destined for redistribution across Newport, Cardiff, and the valleys. Each transaction ran through coded messages, times, and GPS pins shared only minutes before the exchange. Andrews ran it from ordinary spaces, a small terraced home, rented garages, and a handful of local addresses under other people's names. There were no nightclubs or front-page scandals, just a constant rotation of vehicles, burner phones, and couriers who called him simply Rob. On paper, his income was unremarkable. In reality, investigators traced six-figure sums moving through hand-to-hand transfers and unregistered accounts. Some of it was laundered through small trade work and cash-based side jobs. Most of it disappeared into hidden storage, never declared, never found. Behind the scenes, the police operation intensified. Drones hovered above meeting points. Unmarked cars tailed vehicles from drop sites back to urban estates. Every number called and every SIM swapped was logged and cross-referenced. Slowly, the pattern emerged, a map that pointed back to Andrews. Detectives working under Operation Finch began to close in. They matched the phones seized from smaller dealers to Andrews's encrypted devices. Each message, each timestamp, pushed them closer to the center of the network. He had become the invisible hub in a web too large to ignore. But invisibility came at a cost. Inside the network, trust began to fracture. Some couriers questioned payments. Others feared surveillance. Messages grew shorter, instructions more abrupt. The calm control that once defined the operation was starting to slip. Andrews Jr. believed his quiet life made him untouchable. He thought the lack of luxury made him safe. But every clean street and silent exchange had already been watched, recorded, traced, and logged. The moment that undid Robert Andrews Jr.'s empire didn't come from months of planning, it came from a single message. A WhatsApp chain, buried deep inside another investigation, mentioned a name that shouldn't have been there. That name was Andrews. Detectives cross-checked it against surveillance records. The number led to one of his drivers, a Newport-based taxi operator named Mohammed Yamin. What seemed like a routine pickup in a quiet woodland near the motorway would soon expose a drug route worth hundreds of thousands of pounds. Unmarked police units followed Yamin's taxi from a location known among dealers as the Clean Zone, an isolated patch of trees outside Cardiff where no cameras, no lights, and no witnesses interfered. He'd arrived empty-handed. 20 minutes later, he drove off with a heavy sports bag in the boot. When officers intercepted him, the discovery was unmistakable. 2 kilograms of cocaine, packaged and sealed for redistribution. The weight, the wrapping, the GPS data on his phone, all of it traced back to Andrews. That arrest became the first solid link between Andrews and the upper supply chain. Within hours, investigators executed simultaneous searches. Dozens of encrypted phones, hidden SIM cards, and pre-packed wraps were seized. Names and drop sites once hidden under coded phrases now unfolded in plain text. But what broke the network wasn't just the evidence, it was loyalty. One of Andrews's close associates, facing a long sentence, began to talk. Under controlled conditions, he revealed meeting points, payment schedules, and the voice messages Andrews left as instructions. Inside that ring of trees by the motorway, the empire stumbled. One hand reached for the bag. The other went to dial 999. From that point, panic rippled through the ranks. Phones went dark. Cars were dumped. Money vanished. And within days, what had looked like a watertight organization began leaking from every corner. For police, it was the moment they had waited for. For Andrews, it was the start of his endgame. His empire was under siege, but he still believed he held the cards. He hadn't counted on one final move. It was just days before Christmas 2023 when South Wales police moved in. The street outside Robert Andrews Jr.'s quiet home in Newport filled with flashing lights and the low thud of boots on tarmac. Officers had waited months for this moment, the takedown of a man who had built his empire in silence. They breached the door at dawn. Upstairs, Andrews Jr. stood in his dressing gown. According to police reports, he didn't shout and didn't resist. He simply smiled, even laughed, as handcuffs locked around his wrists. Unfazed, one officer said later. He looked more like a man watching a game than one losing his freedom. The search tore through the house. Hidden compartments. Multiple phones. Cash wrapped in cling film. Each item told its part of the story, serial numbers on banknotes matching previous seizures, messages linking supply to distribution, and a phone brimming with encrypted chats. At the same hour, coordinated raids took place across South Wales, from Cardiff to Merthyr Tydfil. Several associates were arrested, others vanished before police arrived. Some would later claim they were only couriers, not criminals. But the evidence, the money trails, the GPS routes, the coded language, told another story. In the courtroom, the calm veneer finally cracked. Prosecutors laid out months of surveillance, digital recovery, and statements from former insiders. Jurors listened to recordings where Andrews directed drop-offs and collections, his tone steady, his control absolute. When the verdict came, it was decisive. Robert Andrews Jr. was sentenced to a lengthy prison term for conspiracy to supply Class A drugs, heroin and cocaine. His associates followed, one by one, as the sentences fell. Each name another brick in a crumbling empire. But justice wasn't complete. A handful of players, money runners, secondary couriers, escaped capture. The drugs they'd already placed in circulation kept moving, weeks after the arrests. For investigators, it was victory, but not closure. South Wales reacted with shock. In communities already scarred by addiction, the news spread fast. A quiet father, a modest home, hiding one of the region's biggest suppliers. By early 2024, the courtroom doors had closed on Robert Andrews Jr. He was convicted of leading a major conspiracy to supply Class A drugs across South Wales, heroin and cocaine at industrial levels. Sentenced to 14 years in prison, his fate marked the end of a long, covert investigation, but the full toll was only beginning to show. For the people of Newport and the M4 corridor, the fallout was mixed. Police seized large quantities of cash and drugs, calling it a major victory against organized crime. But in the same communities where Andrews Jr. once moved unnoticed, the demand didn't disappear. Addiction still lingered on street corners, and new dealers quietly stepped in to fill the gaps. Investigators described the case as a glimpse into the evolution of Britain's drug trade, one built on encrypted apps, disposable phones, and lives that looked ordinary on the surface. No flashy displays, no open violence, just a silent economy moving behind curtains. For every success in dismantling a network, another begins to take shape. The names change, the tools adapt, but the story repeats itself: trust traded for profit, loyalty replaced by fear. When you follow the money, you find more than kilos and wallets. You find families broken, trust betrayed, communities scarred. Robert Andrews Jr. ran one of the most sophisticated supply networks Britain has seen in recent years. He lived simply, dealt massively, and was brought down by an encrypted chat and a single banknote number. His empire lies in shards, a silent warning that even the quietest lives can conceal the largest operations. The networks don't stop. The demand doesn't fade. And somewhere, someone else is building the next chapter, behind doors no one sees, in places most people never look. If this case shook you, hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you'll never miss what really happens behind closed doors.